following is a presentation of the Belly Up Sports Media Network.
14:20 in the morning, 14 minutes and 20 seconds worth of sports talk to get you through your daily commute. Hot takes, recaps, best bets, and a little humor to get your day going in the right direction. Sit back, grab your coffee, and let's get into it. All right, 14:20 in the morning for this 10th day of November, 2023. Our show today is brought to you, as always, by SeatGeek.com and the SeatGeek app. Use promo code 1420POD at SeatGeek.com today and save yourself $20 on your first purchase over there at SeatGeek. We are part of the Belly Up Media Network. Go to BellyUpSports.com for all their great articles and other great podcasts. And congratulations to the Corner Booth podcast. I watched it a little bit last night for their 5th anniversary show. They had everything going over there at the Corner Booth. A lot of fun last night. Chimed in on a couple of would you rather kind of deals, what you'd rather do than watch that football game last night, which I didn't really watch a whole bunch of it. Kind of zoned into the hockey world right now and the train wreck that's going on around there. We'll get to that in half a second. But thank you very much from each and every one of us here at 1420 World Headquarters out to everyone who's listening to the show on and on podcast form or on YouTube as well. Thank you very much. And to all the guests that have been on this week as well. And then speaking of guests, we had Kyle Cushman yesterday, associate hockey editor at The Score out there in Toronto, to talk to all things Toronto Maple Leafs. It was a great conversation. Had a lot of a few laughs, and we talked about women's hockey at the end of it. And we're going to have another couple of shows coming up, talk some women's professional women's hockey that he covers for The Score as well out there in Toronto. But anyways, let's talk about the train wreck or the tire fire, the dumpster fire, whatever you want to call it. That is the Edmonton Oilers. Another loss last night to the lowly San Jose Sharks. And so who's more lowly when it comes down to it, right? 3-2 loss last night. Another poor effort by the Oilers. And Jay Woodcroft, as he was leaving the ice, he was talking to his assistant coach, Dave Manson, saying that might be it. And Manson basically said, yep, that's probably it for the coaching staff. They're probably going to get the heave ho. And I get it to an extent, but because there was a situation over the offseason where the Oilers decided to change their defensive structure and the way the game is played because they saw what the Vegas Golden Knights did last year and how they won the Stanley Cup. And the NHL is such a copycat league that teams just fear, well, if you do this, you're going to win. If you do that, you're going to win. That's really not the way it works. And how hockey guys can't figure that out is a bit of a mystery to me. But it's one of those things. You see it, and you see how a coach is going to get fired because eventually you do get tuned out and things aren't working very well, obviously, out there in oil country. So it's going to be it's too bad that the coach always takes the hit for it. But it's kind of crazy. You think about like the coach always taking the hit for it, and you can't. The old saying, you can't fire 22 players or whatever you have on your roster, 25-man roster, whatever you got going on, no matter what sport it is. But yeah, you see last night. Darnell Nurse, he got a goal last night. He's up to a whopping 4 points now. Nugent Hopkins, he scored a goal last night, so he's now got a whopping total of 3 after having a great season last year. McDavid, you look at him, and he's not blameless in this whole situation with 2 goals. Yeah, he was out for a couple of games with the oblique or the hip or whatever it might be. He's only got 2 goals. Draisaitl hasn't scored in 4 or 5, whatever it is there. And you go up and down that lineup. Like since I gave Patrick. Evander Kane, sorry, not Patrick Kane. Maybe you could use a Patrick Kane, but Evander Kane, I gave him props after the Heritage Classic win over the Flames a couple of weeks back, and he hasn't really done a thing since. So you look at those guys that you're paying a lot of money to score goals, to do this and to do that, and when those guys aren't rolling, your team's not going to win. And so you have a situation. Yeah, you can blame the coach all you want. But if you have a team that's built to like your 2 best guys in Draisaitl and McDavid, 2 of the top 5 guys in the league aren't flying, and you have your team built a certain way, and you have your roster constructed a certain way, there's such a fine line between winning and losing in the National Hockey League that you lose a guy, you have a guy that goes down or a guy that's not producing, and then that's it. You're not going to win. So when you get 4 or 5 guys who aren't producing, who are supposed to be, you're not going to win. We talked about it last week. With the guys from the New World Oiler podcast, that they need guys to keep going. And if they don't have everybody going, they're not going to win. They have no bottom. Their bottom third, bottom 4 or 5 guys aren't scoring goals. So when your top guys aren't scoring, your bottom guys aren't scoring, guess what? You lose hockey games. And it's not like they didn't get a lot of shots last night. I think they fired 39 or 40 at the San Jose goaltender. And once again, Skinner didn't give him a save. 18 shots against, 15 of them were stopped, but 3 went in, right? So you're batting a 854 save percentage in the National Hockey League. Your team's never going to win. So we talked about Campbell getting sent down. We see the problems. Like Skinner's younger, I get it. So you want to try to develop him and see what you got. You're saving a few bucks on your salary cap, but it isn't working in net for the Edmonton Oilers. And it's just it's an awful shame that the coach is going to take a hit for that when really it's the players who should be held more responsible for the effort they're giving. There was a shift last night where Draisaitl was doing banana loops in the end in his own end, not doing anything, just kind of roaming around, like looking up at the lights. So he's tiny mite hockey or pee wee hockey or U15 or U12, whatever it's called. I don't know. Like we talk about that all the time. But the Oilers team lack of effort is the coach. They tuned him out probably. Is the coach probably going to, by the time you guys hear this, like I'll get it out there around 10 o'clock. It's 8:40 right now, Mountain Standard Time. By the time I get it out, they could have Woodcroft fired. It's quite possible. You can't fire the GM right now. What's that going to do for the rest of the season? It means nothing. Let him try to fix his mess and get it done. It's just it's too bad that the coach has to they decided to do something different with that team and it hasn't worked. And you can't go back. And why they can't go back, I don't know. But when you have guys who aren't scoring goals, when you have a guy that scored 150 points last year, and you had a power play that was clicking like 60-some% at one point last year, when that's not happening, then you're going to lose. And that's just the way it is. You need everybody to be going in the right direction, and everyone's going in the wrong direction with that Edmonton Oilers team, and the coach is going to take the hit. And it's too bad that it's always the way it's going to be, but it's just what it is. The Vancouver Canucks, they got a big win last night. They didn't get many shots on net, and they got some goaltending once again. They had a big win in Ottawa. Good weekend. Should be a good weekend in hockey here. We'll get to that in half a second. But the Leafs, they got the Flames in Calgary tonight. See what Johnny Huberdeau can do out there in Toronto. Maybe he's going to have a fire lit under his ass a little bit, and after that benching the other night against Nashville, maybe he'll be doing something tonight against the Leafs in Toronto. And then you got Toronto and Vancouver marquee matchup tomorrow night at the Scotiabank Arena. It's not the Air Canada Centre for quite some time now, but it was fun talking with Kyle Cushman about the start of the Leafs season so far, how it's been going, what he sees his team going at, and talking about the later on as you listen to this, we got into the actual grit grinders that people of Toronto actually like over the years, and it's not the people that you would suspect would be the fan favorites over the years out there in Toronto. So thank you once again to all the guests we've had this week. We'll give them more of a shout out at the end of this show, but thank you very much to Kyle, and make sure you guys have a read of his articles over there in the Score. But here's Kyle and me having a chat about Toronto Maple Leafs hockey yesterday here at 1420 World Headquarters. All right, today we are joined by Kyle Cushman, Associate Hockey News Editor at the Score out there in Toronto, to talk some Toronto Maple Leafs hockey, or lack thereof, for the last couple of weeks. Kyle, how you doing so far out there in Toronto?
Doing well. The weather hasn't been the nicest the last couple of days, but keeping warm inside, doing well.
No, that's good. Kyle, I read your article last night. You wrote after the game last night where the Leafs lost again to the Ottawa Senators. An embarrassing kind of loss. And the coach, Sheldon Keefe, was not too happy with the amount of goals going in, as you pointed out in your article. What's been the issue out there in Toronto? You could say goaltending, you can say defenseman, but what do you think's been the major issue out there with the Maple Leafs and trying to keep the puck out of the net?
Yeah, well, it has been keeping the puck out of the net. And in every home game so far this season, they've given up at least 4 goals, which I don't know if you know, that's not very good when you're trying to win some hockey games. But no, for the Maple Leafs right now, it's something where a lot of talk has been about how this team hasn't changed year over year. It's been the same core, same players, stuff like that. But outside of the core players, there's actually been a lot of turnover in the depth part of the lineup over this past summer. And part of that is a bit of a shift from a bit more of a defensive mentality in some of the bottom 6 players, in some of the defensemen and some of the mixes that Kyle Dubas had, to trying to bring a bit more offense to the table in what Brad Treliving did over the summer. So you're talking about moving out a guy like, or letting a guy like Alexander Kerfoot walk in the summer, and bringing in a Max Domi, and letting a Justin Hall walk in the summer and bringing in a John Klingberg, in an effort to try and bring some more offense to supplement the top players in the lineup. And what we're seeing right now is, due to a little bit of injury luck as well, is some players not really meshing with the current system and struggling defensively. And then in conjunction with a couple of injuries right now on defense, you're looking at a lineup that is giving up a lot of goals very often, and it's making it very difficult to try and win games when you're giving up 4, 5, 6 goals a night. That's just not a recipe for success. So right now, Keefe kind of said it well when he kind of pointed out that a little bit of it is individual, a little bit of it is kind of structural, some of it is commitment issues. But what that all combines to is a team that is not playing nearly well enough defensively to go ahead and make a push for the Atlantic Division, which they were expected to do this season.
You look at a guy like you brought up John Klingberg, and the thing that they singled him out a little bit last night, saying they got to find a way to protect him. And I agree that you don't want your bottom 6 guys playing against the top 6 guys, but eventually you are a National Hockey League player, and to be -4 on a not a nightly basis, he's -8 over the season, but the kind of night he had, and especially when you have last change as they did last night, and he's out there. That's a major problem. I think that you have a guy that's just not playing up to National Hockey League standard, and eventually you're like when you go on the road, it's going to be worse when there is going to be matchup situations. What do you do with a guy like Klingberg, who you said like they brought him in and it hasn't worked out so very swimmingly so far?
Yeah, Klingberg is a fascinating player right now because it's obvious what he's good at. He's got some of the best vision from the blue line in the National Hockey League. That's something that you can't deny. His passing ability is what has made him one of the best offensive defensemen in his entire career in the NHL. But we also know what the glaring flaws are and why he's signed a 1-year contract this summer after a bad year in Anaheim. It's because he's brutal defensively. And we've seen those issues significantly over the past couple of weeks, but really all season long. And I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier in talking about a little bit of the injuries that the Leafs have faced, and that's kind of a reason why John Klingberg has kind of been a focal point right now because they signed him to a 1-year contract, but at $4 million, which on a team like the Maple Leafs who had a little bit of money to work with this summer, but not a ton, giving $4 million to a player that is flawed but maybe wasn't exactly what they needed on the back end, was certainly an interesting decision from Brad Treliving. And you get a couple of weeks into the season, Jake McCabe goes down with an injury. A couple games later, Timothy Liljegren goes down with an injury, and all of a sudden, you're forced to play John Klingberg in this kind of higher up role because of the money that you've paid him. You can't really shelter him the way that the lineup is currently. And it's really bitten them in terms of the team defense. He was on ice for 4 goals against that even strength last year. They did, or last night, I should say. They did score 1, so it was a -3 overall, but he's now a -8 on the season. And it's something where Keefe mentioned protecting him a little bit more. But the way that it is with the injuries, they can't really do anything more to protect him. He's already one of the most sheltered defensemen in the NHL with his defensive zone starts. I think at going into Friday's game against Calgary, he has something like 17 defensive zone starts this season, which is among the least league wide among defensemen that have played at least 100 minutes so far this season. So there's not really much more that they can do to shelter him in terms of giving him offensive zone starts, things like that. What they can do more is limit his minutes, and we'll see what the lineup ends up looking like on Calgary against Calgary. Looks like he might be a 7th defenseman situation, kind of sitting for a bunch of the game if they do end up going 11-7. But I think when they signed John Klingberg in the summer, the plan was to see if they could refine his game on a second pairing with Jake McCabe, but ultimately have him in kind of a sheltered third pairing role, bring some offense kind of deeper in the lineup and quarterback a power play. And so far, the returns from the power play haven't been nearly enough to offset kind of the defensive struggles, especially with him being forced up the lineup very early in the season.
You talked about some of the signings that new GM Brad Treliving had, and didn't have the greatest success story. You think about what's happening out there with the Calgary Flames and the way that team's turned out. Yes, they lost a couple of players, but we'll get back to the Leafs here. Bringing in, like he said, one thing he wanted to do when he took the job with the Leafs was get a little more grit, a little more sandpaper to that team. You saw what happened in the playoffs last year when they finally broke the camel off the back and everything else, but by beating the Tampa Bay Lightning for the first time, it seems like for 100 years. But they need a little bit more grit and sandpaper because a guy, Matthew Tkachuk, kind of run roughshod over them in that next playoff round. And he was that kind of guy. So they went out and they made some deals. They went out and they got a little bit more grit, they thought, but for all intent and purpose hasn't worked very well so far with the signings of Reeves, Domi, and Bertuzzi, who've been fairly silent. Like Domi had that nice assist last night on Robertson's goal, but in general, that hasn't worked well. Bertuzzi has, I think, 3 points. Domi has 6 so far, and then Reeves, he might as well not even be dressing. He doesn't play very much when it comes down to it. What's been the and when you're getting nothing out of those 3, and then you'll get three more guys to go in your in your forward lineup. It's a tough look right now for those signings that Treliving made last summer.
It is, and it's something where, particularly with Ryan Reeves, he's somebody that you expect more of, kind of the physicality, snot, whatever you want to call it, in the regular season, just because that's pretty much his only job. Like, he's not bringing offense, he's not bringing defense, he's not bringing special teams. Like, his job is pretty much essentially to hit, fight sometimes, and kind of bring that energy. And he hasn't done that the last couple of weeks, so that's kind of its own thing. For Max Domi and Tyler Bertuzzi, I'm willing to give them a little bit more leash, just because those are guys that bring a little bit of other elements to the table. Max Domi had a rough start to the season. He's shifted to center. He's played a little bit better the last week or so, kind of finding some chemistry here with Nick Robertson, which would be a really big boost to the kind of the scoring element that the Leafs have been looking for in their bottom 6. And then Tyler Bertuzzi, he's got some chances. He's had some good underlying numbers. He's just not been able to convert on them. He scored his first 5-on-5 goal last time out in that loss against the Senators, so maybe some luck starting to turn there. For Bertuzzi and Domi, I look more to those guys as guys that can be difference makers come playoff time in terms of the physicality element, where they're guys that you can legitimately play in your top 9 and can kind of mix it up and bring a little bit more of that feistiness, physicality when it comes postseason time, because guys like Ryan Reeves, you just can't afford to play kind of meaningful minutes in the postseason. Those minutes just mean too much. And when you're getting killed already in the regular season in those minutes, you just can't afford to kind of put a guy like that out in the playoffs. So we'll see what their lineup ends up looking like come the springtime. I know that's a long time away to kind of make some changes and things like that. So for Domi and Bertuzzi, those are guys that I kind of look more at the long-term picture of the season, where some early struggles and stuff like that. Some of that's going to be some system stuff. Some of that's going to be chemistry. They're both good hockey players. They'll work through it. They'll kind of find their niche on this team. So I'm not too concerned about that. And kind of like I mentioned, I think those are guys that you bring in to be playable guys in the playoffs that can bring some of that more feisty element. Like, you look at what Bertuzzi did in that first round series against the Panthers. Even though Boston lost that series, he put up big numbers in terms of point production and mucked it up as well. And then Max Domi was a key contributor, a key depth contributor, I should say, for Dallas as they went to the conference finals. I'm a bit more concerned about what Reeves is going to do and his role on this team and things like that. It looks like they might even go 11-7 against Calgary to kind of sit him and get a different look in. But yeah, in terms of Treliving's moves this summer, kind of trying to bring in that physicality, snot, like he said, it definitely hasn't worked out in the early going. But a couple of them I'm willing to give a bit more leash to. But Reeves, I've been very disappointed with in the early going.
Like the thing about Domi is, like, I've liked him since his junior days back when he played in London. Then those World Junior teams he played on and everything else. He was always like an electric player, very polarizing figure out there. But there must be a reason why he's on his 6 or 7 different NHL hockey teams so far, right? There's got to be something behind that a little bit, whether it's an attitude or whether it's his contract or something. Like, and I like him as a player. Like you brought up last year, he was really good for Dallas throughout the season last year. But there's got to be something that's just not right in the locker room when it comes to a guy like Max Domi, because a kid that young with that much talent, that much to bring to the table, to be on that, like, you're not a kid anymore, really, it comes down to it, to be on his 6 or 7 different team already, that's got to be a bit of an alarm for something's not right somewhere.
Yeah, he's an interesting case where he's also a bit of a unique personality when it comes to the league. He's somebody that isn't afraid to speak his mind. He's kind of done things a little bit differently. Part of that is growing up around the league, having a father that was obviously a prominent figure in the league, in the biggest market in the league, at least on the English speaking side of things in Canada here. So for Max, he kind of talked about it a little bit coming into the season, where he was asked about kind of coming to the Leafs and whether he hopes to kind of find a home here. And usually players go, yeah, I want to kind of find a place and stick around and stuff like that. And I was a bit surprised by Max's answer, where he was like, people kind of look at that as a negative, bouncing around the league. And he said that he's actually enjoyed it, getting to know a bunch of different people around the league, make a bunch of friends around the league, and kind of take a bit of a different path where you can look at the pros and cons of that. And certainly a bit of a unique situation where coming up in Arizona, a team that was rebuilding a bit and then kind of started a new rebuild. So we got shipped out there, goes to Montreal, has a bit of success there, and then gets flipped for Josh Anderson in a bit of an awkward move for kind of both players involved at that time. And then goes to Columbus. Again, not a great situation there. And then kind of bouncing around on some free agent deals. And then obviously last year having some success early in the year with Chicago, getting big minutes and then getting flipped at the trade deadline. So you kind of look at his path in the NHL and yeah, he's played for a bunch of teams and kind of bounced around a few situations, but you kind of look at some of the teams he's played for and some of the situations he's been in. It's not exactly like he's been on some awesome winning teams and has kind of fallen out of favor. He's kind of bounced around the league partially because he's been caught up in some awkward teams and some awkward situations in their contending windows. So it's definitely something where you can look at it and see like, yeah, he's a bit of a unique personality. I can see how he might not fit on certain teams and stuff like that. But I'm not necessarily prepared to say that like he's a locker room issue or anything like that. And we'll see kind of how things go in Toronto the rest of this year. Obviously, it's very early. He had some early struggles, but it seems like he's been able to work through those recently as he shifts back to center here.
You go rewind a week today. There was a little situation there in Boston where you talked about Timothy Liljegren earlier on. There, he got taken into the corner a little bit hard. Call it dirty, call it just a hockey play, call it whatever you want. It still happened with Brad Marchand there in Boston, and he's out for the foreseeable future. Liljegren is now, and the thing that bothered me the most about that, not that so much you don't want to see a top defenseman get injured or anybody, in fact, in that matter, get injured, but the lack of a response of any kind to go over and give Marchand a bit of a tap in the laces and say, hey, man. And the way Marchand was just beaking off from the bench, doing whatever he wants and doing what Marchand is basically done with the Leafs throughout his career, even when he did it with the Vancouver Canucks back in 2011 with the Sedin boys. It's one of those things where the core guys are the core guys. They've been around for a long time, and yeah, their job isn't to tap guys in the laces and punch guys in the face, and I get that, but that's a bit of a wake-up call for that Leafs team. I think that's the kind of team that they have, that there just seems to not be that what's the word I'm looking for, that kind of grit that it takes to win a championship, that it takes to be a cohesive team unit. That like you look at the Tampa Bay Lightning for years, they don't mind punching the guy in the face. So you look what happened in the playoffs 2 years back when Stamkos was jumping in there to protect his players, and he's one of the top guys in the league. And you have 4 or 5 guys in the Leafs who've been around for a long time, and they didn't do a thing with Marchand. And to me, that's a bit disturbing when you look at the foundation of a hockey club, that it just doesn't seem to be a team unit. What was the thoughts out there Toronto way with the way that all played out?
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment, especially with kind of the focus of the offseason and a lot of quotes being adding that piss and vinegar and adding that snot to the lineup. And then you add all of that to the lineup for a situation like this, where you can say whether it's a hockey play, dirty play, whatever. But if it happens to your team, it should be a dirty play in your mind. And you go out and either say something or do something about it when there's especially no penalty on the play. And when there's been this much attention paid to adding physicality to the lineup, adding kind of these specific characters to the group that are typically kind of stepping out and playing that kind of physical role, and nothing happens of it. And literally the only thing that happened was John Klingberg, of all people, giving Marchand a bit of a tap on the ankles, sending him down, and then pushing him into the boards. Klingberg, who's an underrated feisty player as well. He fought Matt Tkachuk a couple times a couple years ago. But like, that's not the reason you're bringing John Klingberg into this lineup. You're bringing in Tyler Bertuzzi. You're bringing in a Max Domi, especially a Ryan Reeves, to do stuff in these situations. And it's especially frustrating when you have all this talk about kind of that physical element, bringing in guys to bring in that snot element. And then you're like, okay, this is the situation to go out and prove it. And then it's the same thing that we've seen year in, year out, where nothing happens as a result of it. And yeah, sure, the Leafs came back in that game, all that kind of stuff, ended up getting appointed to that game. That's the kind of response you want from your top players in terms of your scorers, like your Matthews, your Marner, stuff like that. I don't want to see those guys busting up their knuckles and stuff like that necessarily. I want to see them giving revenge and payback through putting the puck in the back of the net, which is what they did in that game. But there are other people on this team that are either employed specifically to step up in those situations, or it's kind of the fine print of the contract type situation.
Yeah.
And nothing kind of happened in that situation. And it's frustrating to see because it's somebody in a Brad Marchand, like what Sheldon Keefe said afterwards in the game. He doesn't care about Ryan Reeves. He doesn't care about anybody in this league. It's about the team response to that situation, to be physical and kind of push back against that. And Keefe was pretty blunt in saying that it wasn't good enough, and they spoke about it after the game, I suppose, in practice, leading up to that weekend. But it's something where obviously you don't want a situation like that to happen again, but inevitably something like that will happen again. It's hockey, it's fast, things like that are going to happen multiple times a year. It's now put up or shut up time for a lot of these guys on the team in terms of the response to these kind of situations. And so you don't want stuff like that to happen again, but when it inevitably does happen again, I think there's going to be even more eyes on this Leafs team to kind of see what the response is should somebody be injured on a play like that again.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like, because like it was a day later, a day and a half later, when they spoke and said, "Yeah, we're
Yeah.
all disappointed that nothing happened." And Tavares came out and said the usual just
Mhm.
words. He just said they just said words, and then Keith just said words. So the next
Yep.
time it happens, it's going to happen again. It could happen against the Calgary team tomorrow night. That's battling for their lives right now as well. And so it could happen then, or it could happen with Vancouver, who's playing really well on Saturday night. It's going to happen sooner rather than later, and it's going to be okay. Shit or get off the pot kind of deal, because let's see a bit
Yeah.
of a response, because if there's no response again, then every team knows that they can go in and push the Toronto Maple Leafs around, and it's a bad look early for these new guys and for that core. Let's get to the core. Like, we know that they're going to score. If you talk about
Mhm.
the core four, I'm a Yankee guy, so the core four is a little bit different in my world than it is probably in Leafs land. But you look at Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares. You want to factor in the fifth guy in there, with Morgan Riley. They've been around a long time. You know that they're going to get points, and they have. For like, people are talking about not great things so far about Mitch Marner, but I think he's got 17 points already.
Yeah.
So I'll take he'll be a 100-point guy no matter what. It's not a big deal. Like, I'm not too concerned about that as we speak right now. If he could go and put up against Calgary tomorrow night, he could put up 4 or 5 points, and people are going to forget about it. But the rest of the lineup not doing anything. I'm talking more like the defense and everything. Like, they're not doing enough. And is it one of those situations where, because they're paying these guys so much money, those top four guys especially, and then Nylander, we'll talk about Nylander in half a second too, how much more money he's going to want and get. Is it a situation where these guys, if they don't get it done this year with this core, they ain't getting it done next year?
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing because this is, for the most part, the first year where you could legitimately see a change coming, just because one of those four guys is without a contract at the beginning of next season. Like, it's one thing to kind of go into each summer after a playoff loss and be like, will they or won't they trade a player? But it's so tough to kind of make those big moves in the NHL, in terms of a team that's not necessarily just trading out a big player and just getting future assets or something, trying to move out a star player and get a star player back. It's very difficult in kind of this flat cap situation. Things will start to change a little bit over these next couple of years as we see the cap start to rise again. But for this Leafs team, yeah, this is the first year where, especially if Nylander doesn't get an extension mid-season, you could look at things coming to the end of the season and then being like, okay, let's let the guy walk, even though that's not a great use of an asset, and kind of rejig this lineup and some of the money that's there. I will say that they did have some money to work with this offseason. They used 4 million on John Klingberg. They used 3 million on Max Domi. They used 5.5 million on Tyler Bertuzzi. Those are legitimate signings and players that are brought into this lineup to be impact players that have had varying degrees of success so far. Even re-signing a guy like David Camp to a raise and bringing him up to 2.4 million or something like that, whatever he is on the cap for a fourth line center who has not been good defensively to start this season as well. You add all that up and we're talking about 12, 13 plus $1 million. That is a lot of cap space when you talk about this flat cap world. And um, some of those signings were praised at the time. Some of those signings were kind of knocked at the time. But ultimately, kind of all of those signings right now haven't lived up to their billing to various degrees early on in the season. And so we'll see kind of how things play out as the rest of the year goes. Again, there's a lot of turnover in the bottom parts of this Leaf lineup. There's a lot of guys playing with each other for the first 10, 15 games of their careers. There's going to be some growing pains there, but you kind of expect things to kind of get better by this point of the season. And Some of the duos are starting to work, like Max Domi's starting to find some chemistry with Nick Robertson since his call up. Tyler Bertuzzi's had a couple of good looks on that second line now. Matt Nyes jumping up to that top line looks superb. Some stuff like that. But a lot of the defense, a lot of the fourth line stuff still has a lot to work through. But yeah, this is a Leafs team where, yeah, this is the first time where you can legitimately look at the end of the season coming and one of those core four guys not being here simply because he literally doesn't have a contract coming the end of the season.
And that's huge. Like, and then you look in like all the time, like every team, like it seems to be like a bit of an epidemic. I'm not going to use the P word because went through that for a few words. Well, we use epidemic around here.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I'm not anti anything, but we just don't want to go with that P word. We'll go with the epidemic around the National Hockey League. And you look at what happened with the Edmonton Oilers with Jack Campbell and the Leafs, like you said, I saw on Twitter that you put there that they sure dodged a bullet by not signing Campbell. And I was 100% wrong. I thought they should have kept Campbell with the season he had a couple of years ago. I thought he was a legit guy, and I'm a goalie hugger from way back. And he just the Leafs really dodged one there because that's $4.5 million, whatever he got out of Edmonton. That that doesn't look so good right now. But right now, Ilya Samsonov's playing like a guy who's allergic to vulcanized rubber. He is just having troubles in the net. And now they got to go to Joseph Woll, who was expected to play a lot this year, but not as much as he's going to have to. What do you think they're going to do with Samsonov, and what do you possibly do with a guy who's just really, really struggling between the ears? It seems more just as much as he is struggling on the ice.
Yeah, that's a great point there, where it is only a 1-year commitment for Samsonov, so it's not something where you look at Edmonton, and obviously he's got worse numbers when you look at his save percentage and stuff than Jack Campbell, who was just waived. The difference there, though, is you're talking about a 5-year commitment for Jack Campbell and a 1-year commitment for Ilya Samsonov. So it's not as dire the situation looking into the future here, but in the short term of this season, Ilya Samsonov was expected to be the guy for the Maple Leafs, and obviously you like Joseph Woll and what he's done, but you don't go into the season expecting Woll to immediately take the starting job of less than a month into the season. So for Samsonov, he's kind of had some of these struggles in the past. There's a reason why he was a first-round pick that wasn't qualified by the Washington Capitals 2 summers ago now and went to Toronto as a free agent. Like, the reason that happened was because the Capitals were frustrated by some of his inconsistency and wanted a completely clean slate in their net when they traded him when they didn't sign him and then traded Vanacek and then brought in a completely new tandem of Kemper and Lindgren in free agency a couple summers ago. So we're starting to see that a little bit here, some of the inconsistency and stuff with Samsonov. It's something where you just gotta let him play through it, and it's a difficult thing where he gives up that many goals in quick succession against Tampa, and you have to pull him, and that's not going to do great things for kind of his psyche, especially with a team that's at the top of the league that he just played in the playoffs and all that stuff. It's something where, yeah, Woll is probably the starting guy for this next little stretch here at the very least. But there's no reason why Samsonov should be like a clear-cut backup at this point of the season. He's proven at times in his career that he can be a legitimate starter and a good starter at that. He did it just last season for the Maple Leafs. Whether it's extra work with a goalie coach, extra work with a mental coach, extra reps, whatever it is, you got to help out this guy in the best way that you can. And part of that is going to be just getting him back into games, whether it be low leverage situations, whether it be just a simple back and forth rotation with Joseph Woll. There's no reason to completely sewer his season by making him the complete backup, giving free reign to Joseph Woll as the starter. That's something you worry about later in the season and the back half as you get closer to the playoffs. Right now is about setting up all your players for success later into the season. And right now, even though it's been a bad stretch for Ilya Samsonov, you still have to have faith in his ability to go out there and stop pucks for you. And ultimately, that's going to be getting him some more game action over these next handful of weeks.
Yeah, you got to play your way through it, or else you'll find yourself in the East Coast League before you know it.
Yeah,
Looking
well,
from the outside,
that's the
looking at it,
difficult part, right?
that's just the way it is, right?
Yeah, and especially with goalies, it's not like a forward where you can put them on a third line or fourth line and kind of shelter them a little bit. It's not like a defenseman like John Klingberg, who's going through some struggles right now, and they might use him as a seventh defenseman to kind of limit his minutes and try to get him some confidence back in some offensive usage. You can't really protect a goalie like that. You can give him some soft starts, you can give him some easy start stuff like that, but ultimately he's in the net for 60 minutes or less, and if he's bad and you pull him. There's not a lot of protecting you can do for goalies working through struggles like this. So it's a difficult spot for the Leafs. Luckily, they have Joseph Woll, who's played well in the early going, or else it would be a very dire situation. You look at like what things have gone like in Edmonton and how bad it can get. In the short term here, at the very least, you have Woll, who's playing well. You can give him kind of the lion's share of the starts or whatever you want to do for him. But you got to get Samsonov some reps still. And whether it's a back and forth, whatever it is, give him some easier starts. You got to let him at least have the ability to play through it. Whether he does or not remains to be seen, but you got to give him that opportunity.
Like you look at, like we talk about, I was shocked over the summer when they when Treliving took over for Kyle Dubas. I thought the Dubas was going to come back for sure because he's done a pretty good job. I was quite shocked. Maybe he wanted more free reign. They weren't going to take it away from Shanahan, the Shanna plan. That, well, it's just what it is. He's the president and he sprinkles holy water on the whole organization when it comes down to it. And yeah, I was quite shocked. And then when they bring Treliving in, who didn't have a ton of success in Calgary, but hockey guys get recycled around the league. If Sheldon Keefe doesn't get something done this year, and I'm not saying go out and fire Keefe if they lose the next 2 games to Vancouver and Calgary, but coaches do get let go, and then they actually get let go a lot more when there's a new GM and a new sheriff comes into town because usually they want their own guy. What's got to happen? Like, and Keefe's got to be. He's got to be looking over his shoulder a little bit. He knows that. He's been around the game forever too, and it's just the fact. You're hired to get fired, no matter what. Not many guys end up with a Scotty Bowman. They can retire hoisting Stanley Cup, right? So, what's Treliving's thought process? You think going? Let's go between his ears, thinking about, okay, if we don't get rolling here right away, and all of a sudden we're an 8 seed going in the playoffs, and we got to play the Bruins in the first round. You know how that always turns out. Then what's going to happen there? Because he's been set up here. Here's the players. Here they are. Now it's up to you.
Yeah, well, you talk about Dubas leaving at the end of last season. I expected it to be Dubas returning and probably Keefe leaving. If one of the two had to leave, that was kind of my thought process. It was more likely that Keefe would be canned than Kyle Dubas. And I don't think a lot of people saw a situation where Dubas left, but Keefe stuck around. That was certainly something that of all the situations and combinations that could play out at the end of last season, I don't think a lot of people saw that one coming. And so he gets the extension, stuff like that. That's just more of a formality when it comes to coaches. There's not a lot of coaches
the Leafs
they
have
let
a
go into
a
lame duck situation. It's just not a good mix for everybody involved. But for Treliving and for really any general manager, especially coming into a new situation, the easiest thing to do is always fire a coach. It's a lot harder to try and trade big pieces from a team and kind of mix around that kind of system. The biggest impact that you can have to a team is change the coach. And so, especially for somebody like Treliving coming into a situation where he's kind of praised Keefe and some of the things that he's done in the past, also said some of the things that they could change going forwards. It's definitely something where I would be stunned if they made a move midseason. It would have to be pretty dire for them to make a move midseason. But come the end of the year, depending on how things go in terms of the regular season, where they finish there, how things go in the playoffs, Treliving's not going to be one and done. So if it gets to the end of the season and it's more of the same, the easiest move is to make a move at the head coaching position. And the Maple Leafs, even though it is kind of the spotlight, even though it is a situation where there's been a lot of focus because of the lack of playoff success, all of that, if that head coaching position does become available, it's going to be one of the most coveted positions available. So if it comes to next summer and next spring, and that is a situation the Leafs find themselves in, it wouldn't be all that surprising, just because, like you mentioned, a general manager that doesn't really have any ties to this head coach, and a head coach that has kind of had a few years here now. But yeah, when it comes to making a big change, it's always the easiest thing to do is to fire the head coach. So it's definitely something to watch, but it would have to get pretty bad mid-season to see a change made there. Like we saw Mike Babcock get fired by Kyle Dubas a couple years ago.
I think there was more of an attitude problem.
And that was a situation.
It all kind of came together with that one, but yeah.
And that was a situation where there was a lot of headbutting between the head coach and the GM, but they kept with it until there was this very rough stretch where they finally made that decision. And so it's something where it takes a lot to fire a head coach mid-season, and I'd be pretty surprised if we saw that here for the Maple Leafs.
I'm glad you brought Babcock up. When he got hired this summer, or like it was rumored for a long time.
Yeah.
It kind of was let out, and it went away, and then it had to wait until July 1st because his contract wasn't up with the Leafs and everything else, because he was owed $6 million a year, and so he was still going to get every last penny of what the Leafs owner for getting fired. Were you shocked? Like, you talk like you wait for the score and everything else. Like, what was the thought process around the newsroom out there when old Mikey Babcock ended up with a new job? Were you shocked that like he got first off got hired, and then when he got let go? I wasn't surprised. No, I don't think anybody was. Like, what was the thought process around your neck of the woods where you work when that all went down?
Yeah, for me personally, I was very surprised by the move, just because you look at what Columbus is right now, and I just didn't see the fit at all. Like, I look at a young, fun offensive team that's kind of budding into this kind of new era.
It's not going to listen to an old guy.
Yeah, no, you look at an Adam Fantilli coming into this roster. You have Johnny Gaudreau at the top of the lineup, who's an electric, fun offensive player. You look at
who didn't like Sutter, so he's not going to like Babcock.
All that kind of stuff, and right? You look at all of that, and I just didn't see the fit there. Like, I look at what Anaheim did, and they brought in Greg Cronin there, who was somebody that has kind of bid his time in the minors and has kind of done a lot of work in his career working with young players and kind of finding some fun new offensive ways to work. He comes from the Colorado Avalanche system, who have done some really great things. And then you look at how things have gone this year for them, and not even just looking at the record or anything like that, but looking at how somebody like a Pavel Mintyukov has been used and his electric start offensively from the blue line. And that's exactly why they brought in somebody like Greg Cronin, because he fit what their future was in terms of the construction of both their roster currently, and also what they've got coming up with one of the most exciting prospects on the blue line, and Olin Zellweger and Mintyukov and a bunch of other guys. And I just look at what Columbus did, and they had an opportunity to do something similar, whether it bring in somebody different, bringing in a new forward thinker, a young coach, whatever it is. And they decided to bring in a guy who was literally fired for, in other parts, the lack of just awareness in dealing with young players. And it just
You're allowed to say on this show for being an asshole.
Well, that as well. That right? Pretty much sums it up. And so it just made no sense to me. And there were some people that kind of looked at it and looked at his resume and were like, okay, I guess I understand bringing in, trying to bring in the best hockey coach that you can. But I just looked at the situation and I was like, this is doomed from the get-go. And I don't think anybody saw it coming to an end as quickly as it did. But I think for the future of the Blue Jackets, it was probably best to get out of that as quickly as they could, kind of chalk that one up, toss it out the window. But it just sets them up for another year of just, I don't want to say failure, because anything could happen this year, but you're setting up your new coach to fail when he has a week essentially until the start of the season to kind of prepare things and get going. And Pascal Vincent is a solid coach. He's won coach of the year at the AHL level, stuff like that. Like, he's got a decent resume on him, but the way that he can prepare this team for an entire summer, if he got promoted from the get-go, instead of bringing in a guy like Mike Babcock, like it's just setting your team up to fail. And it's a tough situation there. And I think for Columbus and everybody involved from a team aspect, probably best that they didn't have to deal with the season of all that and kind of deal through the chaos that would have been a Mike Babcock year and stuff like that. But now kind of the focus goes higher up into next summer and stuff like that. And whether Jarmo Kekalainen sticks around longer if they don't end up making the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's just
tough being a brutal fan, because they've been less than mediocre their entire existence. Like, they haven't done it.
Yeah, they upset Tampa that one year in that sweep. It was awesome. Then they lost in the second round, and then they lost Panarin, Bobrovsky, Duchesne, all those guys in free agency, and got nothing for them. And then it was a rebuild situation, and they've got a couple of great pieces here, but they haven't like fully bottomed out and got the top pieces and stuff. And getting Fantilli at third overall is great. Having a guy like David Jiricek in the system is great. Like, they've got some good pieces here. And they might go out and surprise over these next couple years with that kind of fun young core that they've got coming up. But yeah, like it's a tough situation. And even this season, you look at how Kent Johnson has been utilized and him being sent down. And it just seems like since that hiring, it's just been kind of negative story after negative story. When coming into the summer, it seemed like it was going to be a lot of positive stuff around Columbus after getting Fantilli at third overall.
Yeah, things haven't been working out so well for old Johnny Hockey. He hasn't been. He got benched on Friday night there.
Well,
The grass ain't always greener.
So did the guy that they replaced him with over in Calgary as well. So
Yeah,
it's not been
that's
too pretty for a bunch
that,
there.
that's because I'm only about an hour and a half south of Calgary, and that whole story is just mesmerizing to everybody. Like my mom's a huge Flames fan, and she couldn't wrap her head around how like first off how the trade happened. We all know that the Kachuk was going to he wasn't going to sign, and then but for the way that Florida basically went, yeah, here's our leading scorer, here you go. There should have been some alarms going off there. Like here you go, you can have him and a draft pick and everything. You see it, like we're gonna wipe our hands of this guy. And he just, I have a like, I think he's good at hockey. He just doesn't like it very much. That's my own thought about that.
I mean,
there's no way you lose your skill that much.
And like the way that he's just been struggling for so long after having the high of that last season in Florida, like man, it's not like. Can you really blame a guy for not loving his job the way that it's gone the last couple of years? Like you got to find a way to fix that, obviously, in the long-term commitment and the huge contract. Obviously, you have to find a way to fix that. But man, it is a tough situation with that one. Year one, it's
seven and 7/16 of a contract left on that one at 10.5 a year. That's a bad one. Let's at least get a healthy Kyle, and we'll get you out of here. Let's at least get healthy when they're going to, and then they're going to get a guy who's going to get injured, and they'll make the playoffs. Let's not pretend that they won't. And wherever they finish, you got to be. It doesn't matter anymore because you see teams that come out of an 8 seed. Look at the LA Kings a few years back; they did it. So getting in the playoffs, you don't want to play the best team right off the bat, but Florida ended up going to the finals last year, and they made the playoffs on the last day of the season. So the way the league is set up now, and it is very competitive. But once the Leafs get healthy, and they're going to, what do you like? And they won a round last year. What do the people out in Toronto want to see more? And what you obviously want to win a Stanley Cup, but what's a realistic expectation for this hockey club? And I'm a Leafs fan, like I said. My cousin Bill Derlago played for the Leafs way back in the '80s, in the Ballard days. So I've been around this team for a long time. I've seen a lot of crap over the years with this franchise. What would be a successful year one for? Let's go first. A successful year for the Leafs. Because every team wants to win, but it's just not realistic. So, what would be a successful season for the Leafs as a franchise, and what do the people out in Toronto? What do they realistically think it would be a successful season for their hockey club?
Yeah, I think at least for the first part of that question, a successful season is improvement on what has happened last year. And last year they got over that first round hump, so that's not the bar for success anymore. We saw them in the second round kind of flounder and flame out. And so for looking at realistic expectations for this team, I don't think you can kind of put kind of conference finals, cup finals, all that kind of stuff as like realistic expectations for most teams. For myself, I look at realistic expectation needs to be win that first round and at least go out there and have a damn close series in the second round. You might not win it. It's going to be coin flips a lot of the times when you get some of those tough matchups, especially in this Atlantic division where it's going to be a lot of tough matchups, first round, second round, whoever you go up against. I look at first round is the bare minimum. And if you don't do that, then that's a whole different situation. You got to make the second round at the very least, and then put up a damn good fight in that second round, whether it's 6-7 games and you lose or go out there and win. I think you need to see a significantly better performance in the second round. And obviously it was a very close 5-game series. For the Leafs, there was a couple overtime losses in there, stuff like that. They played well in those 5 games, but playing close doesn't matter in the playoffs. You got to win the games ultimately. And you need to see more of that in the second round, should they make it there, which is the expectation. I think from a fan perspective, I think there's 2 ways to look at it. I think the fan perspective is kind of make conference finals and kind of get over this kind of first round, second round stuff and actually like get deep in the playoffs and go on a run. But I think in hand with that is kind of how they play in the playoffs as well. And you kind of mentioned it a little bit with kind of how they were kind of run around by Florida and some of the moves they made in the offseason. I think from a fan perspective, it's not just about how far they go in the playoffs, but it's how they play in the playoffs, whether they kind of play this physical style, whether they muck it up a little bit the way that Boston does, the way that Florida did, the way that Tampa has. I don't think a lot of people in Toronto want to see them score their way to a conference finals, which has kind of been a little bit of what they've tried to do in the past. I think they want to see them be this kind of physical, muck it up in the corners, net front, be annoying to play against in the playoffs. And obviously, they'll cheer for whatever team finds success here in this town. But I think more so than just kind of first round, second round, third round be the expectations. I think the expectations here from fans in the city is how they're going to play come playoff time, because there's been so much talk about Ryan Reeves. There's been so much talk about the snot added to the lineup and Domi and Bertuzzi, and we'll see what moves they may come the trade deadline, who's in the lineup come playoff time. That all of that will be determined at a later date. But I think a lot of attention has been paid to kind of the physical element here early on based off of what hasn't happened in response to a Liljegren situation. What hasn't happened the last couple of weeks with Ryan Reeves playing poorly and kind of not really doing anything since he kind of fought in those first couple of games. I think there's a real expectation from people in the city that when it comes playoff time, this isn't going to be a Leafs team that gets pushed around. This isn't going to be a Leafs team that tries to pay you back with goals instead of fights and hits and stuff like that. So second round stuff like that is going to be the expectation at the very least in terms of what they do in terms of the success of this team. But I think almost more than the expectations of how far they go in the playoffs is an expectation that this Leafs team is going to be different come playoff time in the way that they actually play on the ice.
You know, it's funny you bring it up that way about Toronto fans, because people right across the country, everybody hates the Leafs. You either love them or you hate them.
Oh yeah,
There's no getting around that, right? And you hear it, and people, like, when the Leafs are relevant, people watch, and it's a true story. And it's funny that people think of Toronto, the people who don't like the Maple Leafs, they think of the Toronto fan as metropolitan. They don't really watch, and on it goes. And then, but you look at the players that the Leafs fan base absolutely hold at the highest esteem, or the gritty players. You go back to like Wendell Clark and Doug Gilmour. He was like he put up a lot of points, but he didn't mind punching a guy in the face now and then. And then you fast forward a little bit to the Darcy Tuckers and the Steve Thomas and the Shane Carsons of the world, and the Ty Domis. Like, the Toronto people like their gritty players who spit in the guy's face and will bust the guy's nose. And it's funny how that there's this preconceived notion that the Leafs faithful likes a different type of player, like a Mitch Marner and the flash and dash and everything else. But no, they like the other guys a little bit more. It's true. It's crazy.
This is an Original Six franchise. Has some of the most storied history in the league. Obviously, a lot of it pre-expansion and all of that because of how bad it's been since then.
Wrote a song about it or something. I remember.
I don't know.
We won't get onto that.
But no, you talk about that. But Wendell Clark has a statue in front of the arena. He's not in the Hall of Fame. He's not any of this stuff. You look at his stats, he's not particularly close to the Hall of Fame. He has a statue in front. There's like 10 or 11 of them. But the rest of them are all in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. He's not. And he's not particularly close. And the Leafs have a lot of Hall of Famers in their history that they could put a statue of out in front of the arena. Wendell Clark is one of those guys. I think that's the perfect way to kind of sum it up in terms of the players that this fan base likes. You look around, and sure, there's a lot of Sundin jerseys. I'm sure you see just as many Darcy Tuckers and kind of all those other guys, Ty Domis and all that. Like my dad didn't have a Sundin jersey or anything. He had a Ken Baumgartner jersey, for crying out loud. That's what we're talking about here, right? Like people look back over the last decade and they talk about Colton Orange, Fraser McLaren as much as they do as Phil Kessel and Joffrey Lupul and those guys. Like, they love those kind of players on this team. And I think they want to see those kind of guys show up in the playoffs time and make kind of that impact that they've been hoping for that they haven't had these last couple of years.
Well, those two seasons where they went to the conference finals there in 93, 94, it was unbelievable. It was exciting for everybody. And everybody was watching, because even if you don't, nothing brings two people together like more the hatred of a third, right? And
exactly. Right?
There's a lot of people hating the Leafs, and no matter who the Leafs were playing, people were cheering for them. That's why I think Vancouver got such a big fan base in 94, the way it all turned out. But no, it's crazy. And I hope the Leafs can do one, because if they can finally pull one off in my lifetime and get one, like whoever's on that team, every school in that city will one of those players be named after one of those players. It just will. Yeah, and not even streets. It won't be streets. It'll be
it'll go straight to the
buildings.
Schools,
They'll go to the big boys. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
No, it's crazy. No, Kyle, this is a lot of fun. We'll have to have you on again once the season gets going a little bit. Tell everybody where they can find all your stuff. What do you got going on out there in Toronto?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, you can find most of my stuff on Twitter. I share all of it there. At Kyle_Cush, CUSH, not KUSH. You go to a very different place. If you go to the other one, I write primarily for the Score.
I got into that one today a little
bit. Write for the Score, and so you'll find most of my stuff on there. Got a little bit of prospect stuff coming up on there, which very excited for it. And then, yeah, on Twitter, you're going to find all my stuff there, hoping to do a little bit more women's league coverage as we get closer and closer to the start of the PWHL as well. So, yeah, as long as you follow me on Twitter, you're going to find all the stuff that I put out.
Well, yeah, we should do that maybe next month. We'll get together and talk women's hockey, because that's a big thing. It's something that doesn't get nearly enough press, and it's good, and it should get a lot more than it is. I know they're trying some different things, and I think they have it all. They're kind of got it as a cohesive unit now compared to having 3 or 4 different leagues that they had going on, and everybody's kind of going in a different direction. But I think it's something that doesn't get nearly enough. Let's come maybe next month. We'll sit down.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. Kyle, thank you very much for doing this, and
thanks for having me.
You know what? Go Leafs, man. We'll who knows?
Yeah, go Leafs. Oh man.
There we go. Thanks a lot for doing this.
Yeah, see ya.
Yeah, thanks very much to Kyle Cushman of The Score for sitting down, talking some Leafs hockey. We've had a lot of fun. We had a nice conversation afterwards. At the end of that interview, we talked about talking about women's hockey a lot more and getting the recognition they deserve, and getting some get that out there, because it's women's sports in general doesn't get the coverage that it deserves, no matter if it's hockey or soccer or whatever else might be going on there. So Kyle and I are going to get together and make sure you check out all his stuff over at The Score. Great conversation. Really, it was we talked a lot. Like, these interviews are all great. And you talk before and afterwards. There's a lot of stuff that we should probably get in there, because that's when the conversation really flow a little bit. But no, that was good. Thank you very much to Kyle. And here's a word from our friends over at SeatGeek.
SeatGeek is the ticketing app for fans like the High Five Strangers guy. Game-winning interception? First down? Just a nice, solid tackle. If you're in arm's length, you will be swapping skin with this extrovert. You see, he knows SeatGeek got him a great deal on tickets, so he can focus on what he does best: smacking palms. SeatGeek handles the tickets to sports, concerts, and more, so fans can fan.
There it is, our friends over at SeatGeek. Use promo code 1420pod at SeatGeek.com today and save yourself $20 on your first purchase over there at SeatGeek. Let's do birthdays and on this day and get everybody out of here for another day here at 14:20 in the morning. Here we go. On this day in 1985, Philadelphia Flyers goaltender Pelle Lindbergh smashed his Porsche into a retaining wall in Somerdale, New Jersey after a team party, suffering mortal injuries after 8 games of the 1985 season. Lindbergh won the Vezina Trophy the previous season as the NHL's best goaltender after going 40, 17-7, and a berth in the Stanley Cup Finals that the Flyers lost in 5 games to the Edmonton Oilers. Lindbergh won the final game he started of his career on November 7th, 1985, making 18 saves in a Flyers 6-2 win over the Chicago Blackhawks. Lindbergh's parents gave permission to end his life-saving measures at 9:15 a.m. on November 11th and agreed to organ donation, so his heart was kept beating until November 12th, when his vital organs were harvested and prepared for transplanting. Lindbergh's blood alcohol level was at 0.0 or 0.24, more than 2 times the legal alcohol limit in New Jersey there, when it was 0.01 or 0.10 at the time. Lindbergh, one of the all-time greats. You wonder what kind of a career he would have had. I remember that day quite vividly. It was when I was a young fledgling goaltender myself back then, and it's crazy to think how that all went down. And Lindbergh's career was cut short to drunk driving. Smashed his car. Was a mess. It was an absolute disaster and everything else. Your kid, it hit the waves right across the country. Everywhere on the hockey world was pretty shocked at Lindbergh, and that's how it all went down. But then let's get to happy birthday. Happy birthday to former Major League Baseball pitcher Kenny Rogers, born on this day in 1964 in Savannah, Georgia. Rogers was drafted by the Texas Rangers in 1982 Major League Baseball draft out of Plant City High School in Plant City, Florida, and made his Major League debut on April 6, 1989, walking the only batter he faced on 4 straight pitches. Things would get a lot better for Rogers as he pitched the 14th perfect game in Major League Baseball history on July 28, 1994, with the Rangers versus the California Angels. In his 20-year career, Major League career, he had a record of .219 and 156 with a 4.27 ERA, 28 saves, and 1,968 strikeouts, with stops in Texas 3 times, actually, New York with the Yankees in that 1996 World Series winning team, Detroit, Oakland, Minnesota, and back in New York, this time with the Minnesota Twins. There he is, Kenny Rogers, with the perfect game against the California Angels many, many moons ago. The gambler, Kenny Rogers. Happy birthday to him. Great show this week. Great week here at 1420 World Headquarters. We appreciate all the people who came in and stopped in to say hi and have a chat about hockey. Good job from the intern, Jake, getting this all taken care of. Tuesday, we had Ryan Wetstein from the Seattle Kraken. Wednesday, Jeff Patterson, Vancouver Canucks, was a big guest for us. Thursday, Nick Zoraris for Talk Rangers and the Flames, Locked On Flames podcast. And then, as we just saw, Kyle Cushman coming in this week to talk to Toronto Maple Leafs from the Score out there in Toronto. A lot of fun, a lot of stuff going on. We're not done yet, though. Tomorrow we got, and then Dave and I recorded last night. He's back off the IL, so that one's out there. And then tomorrow, the fan of the van, old Jim Plotner, is going to stop in the Sports Bar, park his van outside there. We're going to have a nice conversation about what's going on in the world of the New York Yankees and all that crap that Cushman was pushing out this week. I think it's time for him to go. Like I'm not being the biggest Cushman apologist, and nobody really is, but his comments this week were pretty off-putting, to say the least. So I'm sure Jim will have his one of a kind, the way he explains things and everything else. So it'd be a lot of fun talking with Jim tomorrow. But before we do that, make sure you tomorrow on the 11th, you make sure you tip your hat and give a moment of silence to the veterans who gave their lives so we can do all this crazy stuff on a daily basis around the world. So it's very important to make sure on November, and every day you should do it. It shouldn't be just a one day a year. Like a poppy should be probably worn all year long, not just once in a blue moon. But there it is. That's 14:20 in the morning for today. Obviously, we're going a lot past the 14 minutes and 20 seconds. Maybe it's time to change that intro. But that's it for another show. Thank you very much to Kyle Cushman once again from the Score out there in Toronto to talk some Toronto Maple Leafs hockey. Make sure you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel and all the stuff that's going on here on a daily basis. We appreciate all the support you give us. And remember, it doesn't matter where you are. It's who you're with. Have a great day, folks. We'll talk to you tomorrow. You just listened to the 1420 Sports Bar podcast. For Beer with Sports, talking a whole lot more. We are part of the Belly Up Media Network. Let's get into it.